I'm here with Olof to talk about Amaranthe and their latest record, The Catalyst, out February 23rd on Nuclear Blast. This is our first time chatting. I'm looking forward to picking your brain about this record. How's things going with you?
Things are great, and it's my pleasure entirely to join you. I love your YouTube channel. It's great. It's always fun to watch your reactions.
Oh, I appreciate that. I really appreciate the feedback. I had a lot of fun seeing you guys play during your latest North American tour that went on in at the end of 2023. We'll talk about the future that lies ahead with a new record. But let me ask you quickly, how was that tour for you guys? Was it everything you expected?
It was amazing from so many perspectives. Like for one, I mean, and obviously most important, we hadn't been in the US for a really long time. And long story short, we did a lot of tours in the US between 13 and 17. And then we figured that not to take a break from the US, but to focus a little bit extra, 17, 18, parts of 19 to do more shows in Europe. And then we all know what happened shortly after that. We went into record an album and the whole pandemic happened. And then, that was going on for 2.5 years. And all of a sudden we found ourselves not having played the US for 6 years, nearly, actually. So just the fact to be back in the US, we played so many fantastic shows, met so many amazing people there. So it was really, a grand time to, revisit all the cities, seeing the familiar faces, feeling the energy of the crowd reaction and everything. Absolutely fantastic. And we've been friends with Dragon Force for a long time. And it was, we have been mentioning this now, off and on for, the better part of a decade and a half, I suppose, that we should, down the line, we should do something together. And, now it's finally happened and happening again in Europe, bringing, a similar tour to over here as well. So, but it was super good tour from every perspective.
You guys had a tour canceled during the pandemic because you guys were supposed to play North America as a headliner. I believe was September, October of the year when everything shut down, 2020. And that was quite the bummer because I was really looking forward to that lineup. Edge of Paradise was also on that lineup originally. So it was nice that they came back with you guys on this tour. So yeah, we had to wait a little bit extra long to see you guys, but it was well worth the wait, I must say.
Yeah, that was a massive bummer for us as well. And we were trying to reschedule it another time where it wasn't even announced, actually. I was going to say between us, but also between us and the listeners, naturally. And so, yeah, we were massively bummed out with that. So we had to rethink the whole thing. And when the Dragon Force option came around, we were super excited that it was something that we could actually do.
No disrespect to Dragon Force, but I really came to see you guys in Nano War of Steel. So after you guys were done, I think we watched one or two songs from Dragon Force, and then we went home. I really came to see Amaranth. I wanted to experience. We felt a little bit left out, so I was really looking forward to seeing you guys perform. And you guys put on an incredible show, tons of energy, great stage presence, a lot of great setup. Like it was really a fun night to see you guys perform and play some newer songs that we hadn't heard on this side of the Atlantic, and that takes me to the Catalyst. So, what was the
Yeah,
catalyst behind the Catalyst?
the catalyst behind the catalyst. I mean, I was kind of thinking about it the other day that an inception point certainly for writing this album and the way that we approached it, and the way that we also composed the songs and what the end result is basically is it's because of the pandemic as well. Because we were promoting the Manifest album right until the end of 2020, and around November 2020, we were kind of saying in the band, let's take some time off, like half a year at least, because we've been touring nonstop for the better part of 10 years. So let's get a little break, let's see where we will end up as people and as a band. And, we've built something stable, so you don't have to worry about us, constantly doing nonstop shit. So sorry for that. But what actually happened was the reverse. So this was a great idea on paper, but so what really happened was that 1 or 2 months pass, and then we suddenly find ourselves like, I'm writing a little riff here, and Elise is recording some like phone messages thingies that she's sending over. So I could tell that there was a lot of enthusiasm, maybe not to write an album exactly in the beginning of 2021, but at least do a lot of concepts. And so we had a very long concept phase for the Catalyst record. We would try everything and anything, like even if it sounded like a stupid idea on paper, like let's record it and see how it goes. So we did a ton of demos actually for this album, where we could kind of afterwards pick and choose and kind of select where in what direction generally that we wanted the album to go. So it was kind of an amazing thing, despite the fact that the circumstances were absolutely horrible. Then at least the silver lining, because there's always such a thing, was that we really got to pick our own brains when it came to where we wanted to head creatively. So we had a lot of fun doing that. We did some out there stuff that would probably never see the light of day, but it made us a lot wiser for what we wanted to do creatively ourselves.
The interesting thing that you're saying that there's some stuff won't see the light of day, but I thought the record had some songs that were quite out of the box, and that's saying something, considering that you guys don't really have an umbrella that covers everything that you do. The sound is so diverse, the albums are very eclectic, but this album, even this record, had some songs that I was like, wow, where did that come from? Like even some metalcore influences and things that I wasn't really expecting from you guys. When you look back, did this album become really a result of the process of the time, or you guys perhaps discover a way of catching lightning in the bottle twice, and there's lessons that you will take from this record into the next record?
I mean, I think that's an interesting perspective, because we had some songs in the past and some albums that did really good. Like Manifest was easily the most successful in terms, of that perspective, in terms of streams and listens and all these things. What we didn't want to do was to try to recapture it, but we were kind of just looking at it from the perspective of what is the music that we want to do, what would be creatively exciting for us. And that doesn't only mean what you put on an album and how the album comes together. It's also kind of how do you want to be perceived as a band on stage? What's going to vibe with you on stage? What can you do with it in terms of lights, stage setup, and all these things. So I think already when we started to write this album, it was in the back of our heads that we were going to work a lot on that as well. And obviously now that we just toured the US, when you saw us, this was at the tail end of the Manifest touring cycle, even if we played a couple of new songs. So what we're doing now in Europe is that we're working with this set that we built, which is kind of ties into the whole concept, and will hopefully, creatively speaking, take the entire live experience to like a big step up, and lots of program lights and some lasers and lots of cool ideas that we've been thinking about doing for a long time. And naturally, the next step is that we're already looking at is to take this to the US as well. And I would say before long, I would probably say even within a year or a year and a half at the most. Since we had a great time touring the US, and we have this whole concept that is part of the album package that we want to bring also. So it's basically, all these different ideas, like what goes on the album, what works live, what could you do a cool video with, all these, creative inputs and outputs that you have. So all of that definitely went into the creation phase of this album.
How much, when you look at the development of the band across the years, 7 records you guys have released, how much is the development and growth of the band tied into your own personal development and growth, not just as an artist, but as a person?
Very interesting, actually. I haven't necessarily thought about it very much in those terms, but now that you do mention it, I think one is going to be a reflection of the other, for sure, naturally. And I think that while our music is, it's a little bit, I use the term evergreen, but I don't mean it in the sense of hits. I mean more like in the sense that it is kind of youthful sounding music in a way, even despite that you're aging. And it's music that the music itself likes to have fun. That that's just part of the concept, and that's always something that's going to be part of our sound. But I think in some other terms, in terms of maturity, I think there's absolutely a bleed over there. As you age, hopefully grow wiser, but definitely full of more experience. That's for sure. then this is going to bleed over into the music and also the lyrics, not the least. Because even if we were even on the earlier albums, that could be serious topics that we were dealing with. Even if a song sounds like an Amaranthe party song, it can, often deal with a lot more important or deeper things. And I think that's definitely the case with the Catalyst, is that it's, I would say, probably by far the most mature albums in terms of lyric writing, both in the terms that we put much more thought and effort into the lyrics, like to really match and also to really contrast the songs. So that's absolutely going to have an effect. And I think that, if you are going through bad times in your life, that can be an influence. If you're going to good times in your life, that can be a different kind of influence. And to sum it all up, like if I listen to our back catalog, like not necessarily in a row, because I'm not that much of a narcissist, but in terms of when you hear older songs that you did, it's easier now. Let's say from the Massive Addictive album, which is now 10 years old, I can tell now probably better what the songs are about than I could at the time, if you get my meaning.
Yeah, you mentioned that growth on this record, and taking some of the experiences. Does that explain some of the darkness that this album has? Because for as much as there's still a lot of party songs that makes you want to have fun and dance and have a good time, there's some songs that have this underlying. I don't think it's necessarily in the forefront, but there's this underlining darkness to it, either maybe in the way the lyrics come across or even in the way the sound interacts with the vocal performance. Is that where that's coming from?
I think partly, yes, certainly. And I think it's also a general reflection of the times. Being a human being in the collective world community hasn't exactly been an easy thing in the last 3.5 years. That's almost like an understatement from a great many different perspectives. Not traditionally, as I mentioned before, Amaranth likes to see the silver lining of things. Like even if we're dealing with dark themes, we like to see like the light at the end of the tunnel, and how to deal with the concept of these dark themes, essentially. But I think from my own perspective, I think it's also about the contrast in the music, like in the dynamics of it, because that's something that we're constantly working with, since we have this, one side that is very heavy, like musically speaking, and then the other side that is really keyboards and high pitched vocals and all that stuff. I think it's always interesting to see how much can you work with the contrast and still make it coherent, or do you bring it closer together or whatnot. But we are a band of contrast for sure, and that's always something that we're working a lot with. So I agree with you, like not the least when it comes to some of the vocal lines, they're really rather dark in a few places. And Elise went in quite a few places that she hasn't gone before, like strictly musical, which I found very inspiring also.
The other aspect of this record that I thought was really interesting is that you guys always had this very heavy synth sound that becomes part of the DNA, of the melodic DNA of the band. But this album really pushed the guitars consistently forward. I think this is perhaps the most guitar-driven record that you guys have ever released. And how much of that was your concept, your idea for what you wanted the sound to be, and how much of that was also the production, and also thinking of what these songs are going to be like live? There's like three things you have to consider.
Mm-hmm. I think it's all of the above. So because obviously, if you're doing something that is very guitar driven, but you also have keyboards, that can actually essentially be changed, or rather even destroyed in a mix afterwards. It's not something that we were thinking like super actively about, like push it, let's push it extra. But it's something that it's kind of what are the songs asking for at the end of the day. Like you have these vocal lines, you have this general riff. There's also a lot of songs that are really down tune on this album, like for example Insatiable and Interference, that people haven't heard yet, but and a couple of other ones. They're tuned to G now, so we're down in very low territory here. And that's also going to put the guitars in a little bit of a different spectrum sonically. And that's also typically what I try to do, is like to separate the things as much as I can. Like keyboards and vocals, as opposed to guitars, they should sit in different places already in the composition phase. Because I know that it can be very alluring to start to layer things on top of each other, like almost exactly in the same sonical space. But then you're going to have a nightmare, trying to figure the whole thing out. So that's also something that comes with experience and general knowledge. Like, how do I make a guitar stick out without running straight over the vocals? Because I've heard both versions while doing interviews for this album. Like, people are saying there's less guitars now, more focus on electronics, and other people like yourself say the reverse. And I guess in some case both is true, actually.
Yeah, I think it's kind of depending on the listener, or at least maybe depending on what your expectations are and what you think of Amaranthe as a band coming into this record. For me, it felt to me like the guitars were very powerful and very noticeable throughout the entire album, without taking anything away from what the DNA of the band has always been. And speaking of that DNA, you guys added a new piece of that DNA with Mikael on vocals. How was the search and finding that piece, and what were you specifically looking for to fill in that role?
I mean, that's it. I have to be honest, not particularly easy, of course. I mean, we had a phenomenal growler before. Henrik is a very technical growler, obviously, and can do a lot of things with rhythm. So in order to have someone sing in the band at all and sing the old songs, that person needs to do what Henrik did in the last 9 years plus. So that's going to make it really complicated only to begin with. And then you also need someone who is like in how should I say, in the right age range, right personality, and exactly as you said, like, where do you want to take it? Because you don't want it to be a total ripoff from what Henrik did before either. But you absolutely don't want it to be shockingly different either. Maybe shockingly different can work if it works with the rest of the music, but once again, they will have to sing the previous songs without upsetting the fans also. So it was a long search. We considered a lot of different options, and Michael had taken a little bit of time off from the musical scene. He sings in a band called Engel, and he kind of resurfaced, maybe a few months before we started to record the album. And when we saw that he had resurfaced, we were like, yeah, this guy, like, if he's up for it, from a pure growling point of view, he would be absolutely perfect. And since we toured with him before, we knew that he was a great guy, since we had spent an entire month with him on a tour bus. So we had a call with him. He was very enthusiastic, and just a month or two later, he was in the studio nailing all those songs in a few days, actually. So that was impressive.
His performance was great on the record and great live. So I've experienced both, and I thought he added a little bit of a different heaviness on this album, because his voice comes across differently. It's at a different level. It's almost at a different register. So it hits the overall sound with a little bit more oomph. Does that also counterbalance nicely with the sound, with that jovial sound that you said earlier that you guys create, having a guy that can bring the mood down just with his voice?
I mean, exactly. As said, like, the band is really all about the contrasts at the end of the day. And if the different singers is also really what kind of puts the emphasis on those different contrasts also. So if you have the right kind of growler doing the right kind of sound, I mean, I also think Michael, he's definitely musical enough to understand where it should be going. Because in terms of production, like, because I wrote this growl part from what I figured what would work good for him, and we were kind of bouncing it back and forth, and we found something that we thought worked really well for him. And once he started to record it, there wasn't necessarily that much that I needed to add, or Jacob Hansen, the producer, needed to add in terms of this is how you should sound. Like, there's always going to be like, maybe push it a little bit in this direction, but he had a very, very good idea of how to fit in with the music. Because even if our music is, it's a little different and it's eclectic and diverse, as we said, but it also makes sense, at least to me, and I could tell that it made sense to Michael as well, like how to fit these parts in and how to work with it. So it was a very exciting process in the studio.
One last question for you, which is always something that crosses my mind every time I hear one of your songs, which is, What's the most difficult thing about creating an Amaranthe song? Because you guys have a great cast of musicians, from drums to bass to you on guitar. I mean, you guys are some of the best in the business. But then you have three outstanding vocalists. How do you find room for everybody?
Well, I won't say difficult is not exactly how I would define it, but you touched upon something interesting there, like who's gonna sing what and how will they sing it and how will the singers interact on the song. It's not always obvious exactly how that's going to work, because Elise writes all the vocal lines and we kind of work with the music together. From maybe I will write, like an intro on the keyboards or the guitars or something like that, and then she adds a little bit of vocals, and then we sort of from there we can kind of see where the song is going. And then once the vocal lines are done, you kind of think that, okay, this sounds a lot like Elise part, but this also sounds a lot like an Elise part. But then in the back of your head that Nils is such a phenomenal singer, so even if Elise has written something that sounds really poppy for her, as soon as Nils starts to sing it himself, then he transforms it into something different. So you get a kind of a very different result based upon who is performing the part, basically. But I would say, rather than difficult, I would say that's really part of the exciting process. Like, you have this kind of skeleton demo, and to take it from the skeleton demo to the finished product is maybe the most rewarding part of the entire process, actually. So I would say with the most difficult part of any album process is always what songs do not go on the album. Because typically these days we write a million songs, or I would call them fragments and ideas, because that's a better description. And then, but you can still, especially for us, we can tell exactly where these ideas are likely to go. So then we have to, before we enter the studio, sit and pick and choose, like, so how do we balance this album? Like, what do we want to work on? And typically we want to work on a lot of things. And we know that once these songs are buried, they're very unlikely to come back later, because then you want to write new songs instead. So that's definitely the most difficult part.
There's a lot of quality stuff that never saw the light of day.
I would say so, yeah, for sure. But such is the nature of creativity.
It's quite depressing from a fan standpoint to think that there's still so much out there, and then you just continue to look forward to something new. But that's something that at least you guys keep giving us new music and great music at that. I really hope to see you guys back in North America soon, because you guys toured on the last record technically, so now you guys have a new record. I really hope to see you guys back this year, at the very least in early 2025, so that we can hear more of these new songs.
And I can say that's definitely going to happen. That's absolutely in the pipeline, for sure.
All right, man. All the best. See you when I see you in North America, and enjoy the album cycle, enjoy the album release. Say hi to everybody from me, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Pedro, and an absolute pleasure to finally talk to you as well. And
my pleasure.
Take care.
Take care, and
thank you for taking the time.
You guys are here. Bye.
Also, man, take care, man.